Hi everyone, this is Paul Mallory from the Thrive Tribe. Welcome to today's video interview. I'm delighted to be joined today by Paul Bulos, who works for a publisher called Hachette, and is also a coach. Paul's going to tell you a bit more about himself in a moment. And Paul and I were connected by a friend recently in relation to an article which Paul was featured in. He was interviewed for something called the Wellbeing Network. And basically, Paul has done a lot of great work on the subject of well-being, mental health, emotional health in his workplace. And I'd love to learn a bit more about that from you, Paul, if that's okay. And then in general, with your coaching and your well-being work, we'll talk about, how all of that impacts thriving. It seems to me nowadays that the whole mental health, emotional health subject is a massive one. And it seems to be, particularly in our Western culture, it seems to be one of the biggest issues that we have to face. And we don't seem to be dealing with it particularly well, certainly in the UK, where I am. So we're wrestling with how to do that. And I think this is something that impacts everyone. So it's a fascinating subject, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what Paul has to say about it. So, Paul, thank you so much for sparing the time and joining us. It's a delight to have you here. Could you give us a brief intro to what you do, how all this sits with you, and then we'll get into some Q&A.
Of course. Well, thank you very much for taking your time out and inviting me to feature in in this interview. So, as you said, I'm Paul Bulos, and I work for a company called Hachette. Hachette is part of a huge French publishing organisation. We're trade book publishers. Principally, I work in the trade divisions, which means non-fiction, fiction, all sorts of really exciting titles we publish across both adult and children's. I've worked in the publishing and media industries now for a very long time, and prior to working at Hachette for two of their specific divisions, I worked for BBC Worldwide. I've worked for their books division, but also their digital media division. And prior to then, had time with Harlequin, Mills and Boon, well-known romance book publishers. And so my whole career has been in and around the media industry. My actual role, I'm a contracts director. So what that means is I draft and negotiate contracts, which is about acquiring copyrights in books. So I deal with authors and agents and content providers and brand owners and lots of exciting people like that, really. So that's my job, if you like. However, there's a bit more to what I've been doing over the last few years, principally around my work at Hachette. So about 3-4 years ago, I had a bit of a moment in my career where I was kind of thinking, what am I doing? What's it all about? Sometimes that comes with age, sometimes that comes with longevity of career or the particular industry you're with. But for me, it came at a point when I was thinking, what's my purpose? Do I really enjoy what I'm doing? And if I do, or if I don't, how can I start enjoying it more? Or how can I start enjoying my life around my work a bit more? That also coincided with an opportunity. I came after reading a book by a well-known coach and contacting her and having some coaching myself, which focused very heavily on values, which seemed quite relevant at that time for me to sort of go a bit deeper to find out what really motivated me and what was important to me. And that also coincided with something that was changing at my work. So we had a new CEO take over at the sort of top leadership of Hachette UK, and he wanted to address inclusivity and diversity within our business. Something that I've been very interested in for a long time. And so I joined this group at the very, very early outset and became very entwined and involved in that. And that led on to me becoming a leader, co-chair of a network dealing specifically with well-being. So I found myself having, my paid for job, but also a really thriving area of interest for me amongst a lot of my colleagues from across the business, all around diversity, inclusivity, and finding myself very, very drawn towards this idea of well-being and how our organisation was in terms of a strategy around well-being and how our people were thriving within it and what the issues were for people and how they could feel okay at work, really. So that's sort of where I am, and
Right.
yeah. So and then as you described in your introduction, we were introduced. So
Yeah, and you're in the UK, obviously.
yeah, based in the UK. Yeah, we're an international company, but yeah, I'm based in the UK, and I have worked actually. Obviously, the BBC is an international company, and previous to that, Harlequin Mills and Boone. So I've travelled for my work, and worked with people all over the world. But yeah, based in the UK.
Yeah. Okay, and let's dive in then with you've already introduced us to this subject that you've talked about that really grabbed your interest around well-being and inclusivity and diversity. Why that? Why do you come to that? What draws you to that subject? Why I can imagine, can't think of any specific examples at the moment, but I can imagine people in business saying, "Oh, come on, we're here to make money. What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
But why? And some of us, I think, are drawn to these subjects, and others not so much. And I'm curious what it is for you that pulls you towards that as a subject.
Yeah, so as I mentioned at that time, that came and mixed with my own sort of raising of awareness around what was important for me. I also found at that time that I had a lot of alignment with concerns around how to be authentic at work and how
Right.
important I found it to be authentic at work and how to bring my whole self into work. And often that's conflicted when we're not well. And we mask and we cover things up and we put on a different appearance so
Mm.
that we can go into work and perform. And because I was going through a bit of a period of reflection, I was reminded of a very, particularly across my life, some difficult challenges that I'd faced, and recognized in myself that actually what helped me get through and come around that was being authentic and being open, which is sometimes very difficult, particularly around the areas of mental and emotional well-being.
Mm.
And there's also, as we all know, quite a dangerous taboo and stigma for men, particularly around that area. And having been through that, and sort of combined with that change at work, I thought, well, this is a time for me to be truly authentic, actually, and a time for me to take a different sort of leadership approach, because it was involving a network and leading a network which was forming from very small acorns, and taking myself into that with some experience, with a great degree of reflection,
Mm.
and thinking, what's it all about? Or am I going to carry on coming to work, being really professional, wearing a suit, doing all that bit? But what about all this other bit of me that's really important? And how do I bring that to work? And how do I bring that to be a benefit both to me in terms of my performance, but also to the business and to my colleagues?
Mm.
So I had a particular interest in areas of well-being, and having been through various different types of therapy myself, and having been through some key challenges, I also recognised that it was important for leadership to show authenticity and be very real in amongst all of that.
Mm.
Because the expectation is that we have open teams, and if you're talking about issues like inclusivity, you need to be open to everything. So inclusivity, of course, when we think about that in terms of D&I in business, we often think about ethnically diverse groups. We think about LGBTQ plus groups and faith. But really, well-being transcends all of those things because it affects everybody. It does affect people in different ways, and it does affect groups in different ways.
Mm.
But we're all influenced, our whole influence is around our health.
Mm.
So I thought, what a perfect opportunity to set something up, to get a bit more under the sort of skin of the company and the people within it and see what was bothering them around this area.
Mm-hmm.
And to use some of my background and my experience and my empathy around that to see whether I could make some changes in the workplace for everyone, actually.
Right, right. I love that motivation and that way of thinking about it, because it's really what the Thrive Tribe is all about. That's why we started this thing in the first place.
Yeah.
My sort of take on this whole thing was that it's not really good enough that we just survived the process. Somehow we clung on to the life raft and made it through life. That doesn't seem to be enough. And so the thinking behind the Thrive Tribe was, why is it that we're not being more authentic? Why are we not enjoying work more? Why don't we do the kind of work that we love to do more? and all that kind of thought process. So well-being in the workplace is massively a part of that, I think. And as I was saying on one of the videos I was recording just the other day, no matter, my observation would be, no matter what level of material success you achieve, if you don't feel good, it's not success in my terms. Success to me is I feel really good about life. And I think that over the years that's become, for me, about finding meaning in what I do, of feeling like this isn't futile activity.
Sure.
So I love what you've done there, and maybe in a minute you could tell us a bit more about specifically what that program includes. That would be fascinating to hear a few examples. But the question you've really provoked for me in what you said was, you talked about the sort of the sort of vulnerability needed to express yourself and be authentic and talk about potential failings or weaknesses, or what might be perceived to be weaknesses in our characters or our mental health or whatever. What has been your experience in reality of that, of trying to get people to open up and talk about it? I mean, that's the first issue, isn't it? How do we make it an acceptable conversation to have?
That's a really good question. And I think really a simple answer is creating safety. We have to create cultures within our workplace, within our world, actually, that enable people to feel safe, such that their vulnerabilities are held without judgment, spaces are provided for them, and that they have people around them that come with positive unconditional regard, and are empathetic, and that can just hold a space and listen. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. It's a big ask, actually, because funny enough, I read something once, and it always said is that what really resonated with me is that listening is probably one of the key things. And as a coach, I understand and learned actually how to do that better than I was doing it before. And it's sort of, for me, one of the things, as I was about to say, that resonates is that our lips close, and we're physiologically supposed to be able to close our lips, but our ears remain open, and there has to be a reason for that. And I think the reason for that is that because we should be open to listening all the time. So I think the first thing is for people to start to open up is to find themselves in an environment that's safe, with people that will hold a space empathetically, with positive unconditional regard, no judgment, and are there to listen. And once you can create an environment like that, I think that you find people coming into it and feeling maybe this is somewhere where I can share some things. And of course, the other thing about that safe space is there should be no pressure, because people contribute in all sorts of different ways, and it sort of touches on the area of introverts and people with more introverted characters and extroverted characters, and how they contribute and how people view contribution. So I feel that both more introverted people that would that are inward and that draw energy from that inward place, and extroverts need to understand what that safety means for them too. And it all speaks to inclusivity, all of it. So when you talk about well-being, or when you start those discussions about well-being, everybody should feel that they're invited, whatever the issue is. And mental health and mental and emotional health has a really wide spectrum. It means a lot of different things, and some of it medicalized, some of it very general. But we all have mental health, and at different points in our life, it can be positive and strong mental health, and at other times it can be challenged. And as long as we create a space that people can feel that it's okay, whatever that means to them, then we're beginning to start making progress.
Yes. And making these conversations okay and safe, as you were describing, is, at least in part, surely a question of culture, isn't it? A question of what's normal and what's accepted behaviour.
Yeah.
For example, I've worked in some corporations where I've definitely felt that was not the kind of environment I worked in. Thinking particularly of the last one I worked in. There's a reason it was the last one. And it really wasn't a place where you wanted to show any vulnerability, because it would be seized on as a sign of weakness, and there was quite some coercion and use of power going on, which is quite unpleasant actually, which is why I stopped doing it to myself in the end. But I'd like to, just quickly pay tribute to your CEO. I watched a video that he recorded where he was talking about this. And it seems to me that if you want to introduce a culture or change a culture or have a culture where we can have honest and open conversations about this, you kind of need a lead from the top, don't you, to say, this won't in any way be any kind of black mark against you that you've displayed some weakness here.
I mean, yeah, and thank you very much for making reference to our CEO. I think he's made a huge impact on the business in terms of the way that he leads, and that openness and the ability to be able to connect so well with everybody in a way that does encourage challenge. It encourages a thought around the importance of inclusivity, both to us as employees, but also our audience, our readership, and how we really are able to influence people's worlds as a business. So therefore we need to be open to everybody's world, and we need to open our world. And I think he's communicated that exceptionally well. And it was his drive that really motivated me initially to get involved in the beginning, because he was just so authentic about it. And he was very open and vulnerable himself, and was able to say things like, we will make mistakes, I will make mistakes as we go through this journey, and we have to have some patience and some time to accept that we will make mistakes. And the other thing also about culture is, yes, I think we look to leaders to change culture, but actually we are the culture. People make the culture, so it's within us to influence that. Now, often you hear, and you do often hear it, I think, in business, is that, I don't like the culture around here. What are they doing to change it? Or I wish the culture here was different, and I just wish someone, one of the board directors would just do something to change it. And the truth of the matter is that we create the culture. We are the culture. So the way that we behave will influence how that then becomes. And I think it's enabling people to recognize that in themselves. And our CEO's done that just exceptionally well, because what he's effectively done is taken away so much of that top-down influence that people feel like, well, we just got to do what you say. And he said, I want it to come from within. And I want you to feel empowered and take an ownership mentality to these things and make those changes as if the business were yours. So you determine how that business looks. Therefore, you're determining the culture of that business. And it's working really well. Now, that's not to say that he's not leading, because of course that is exactly what I see as very strong leadership. And I think the other thing about leadership that's really important is that we're conscious in ourselves of how what we do as leaders, or what we do in business in teams, influences other people. So conscious behavior means not just talking about it and saying, clock off at 5:30, but I'm going to stay till 7, or don't send emails after 8 o'clock, or avoid sending emails at the weekend and then I send them as a leader or part of a team. It's being conscious of how your behavior is, and that influences culture. And eventually, I think what happens is that when you empower people and you give them, you give some structure to that, but you empower them, that then facilitates all sorts of really positive things in terms of performance and development and thriving. So challenge, for example, he positively encourages challenge, because often when you're a leader, whether you're a leader of a big corporation at the very top or you're a leader of a team, it can be quite isolating. And because you get people around you that want to give you the right answers that they think you're looking for. But actually it's the opposite that you need. You need challenge. You need, because you're sitting quite in a lonely place sometimes, which is where coaching can also help, of course.
Yes.
The other thing I think that's important to think about in terms of authenticity is that if you can give of yourself, it gives permission to others to give of themselves. And if you see someone in a very high position of leadership, and they can be vulnerable, then you think, well, okay, so he or she has got to that position, and they're telling me that actually they still have this normal stuff that goes on: worries, anxieties, fears, insecurities, uncertainties. So that must mean it might be all right for me to say a bit about that. And the third thing I think that's really important is failure. Having a culture that doesn't penalise failure.
Yeah.
And I think, again, our CEO has encouraged failure as a place not where it's not punitive, but that's where we get our most learnings from, and therefore our most growth, and therefore our best performance, and therefore safety. And they all begin to start connecting. It's a web, it's a network.
Yes. Wow, there's so much in that. I mean, that last point there, you know, sometimes I look at the culture of some organizations and think that, you know, here is an organization where at all costs you must make sure you don't commit any kind of mistake, which usually leads to an organization that's not achieving very much because people are just being so cautious, they're being so careful, but they're not actually taking responsibility or making decisions and all that kind of thing. You know, in contrast with some of the organizations that you look at and think, wow, how the hell did they achieve that? Which tends to be people making lots of decisions, and they're making mistakes, but they're moving, and they have direction, they have motivation, you know, they have drive. So it's finding the right balance, isn't it? And I agree with you that I think leadership is a lot about just helping to set the climate for people, you know, of here's how I want us to be, and then enabling them to be more of who they are. I mean, it's really interesting, as you were talking there, Paul, about authenticity, inclusion, diversity, and there was another word that I've forgotten now, maybe leadership, but all of those things together, in my mind, as you were talking, they all began to become about the same thing, actually, because it seems to me it's about enabling what we have inside out.
Correct.
You know, which is almost the definition of thriving to me. You know, it's my belief is we have massive potential, and still I have moments, you know, where I get up in the morning and think, I can't really scratch the surface of what I can do. You know, why am I holding it in? You know, it's how do we allow this out of us?
Bringing it out, absolutely.
Because of the mask thing that you talked about, there tends to be a lot of pressure on us, and a lot of pressure we put on ourselves to conform.
Yeah.
You know, to fit in, to be part of the crowd, to be normal. And the problem with striving to be normal is we're all looking around trying to be like everyone else, and that kind of keeps us all at a level. So the leadership aspect that you were talking, that was starting to excite my brain a little bit, was, you know, it would be about encouraging people to break out of that cautious normal and just, come on, show me who you are. Let's see some more of it. I mean, do you have any examples of how that happens in practice, or examples of where people have done that? If people are watching this, you know, and saying, so I have to allow more of myself out, what kind of thing might that be? I mean, I'll throw one on the table. I mean, it strikes me immediately that kind of communication is a key one, you know, that not being afraid to say what you're feeling, or which is a big thing in coaching, isn't it? You and I have both experienced this. It's just getting people to say what they're thinking. You know, come on, find a way of expressing that you don't have to worry about upsetting me or destroying me emotionally, and yet you can challenge me, or you can allow your thought out because there's value in it.
Totally. And I think the key aspect again comes back to trust and safety. When you're trying to create a culture or encourage a culture of trust, you'll get so much more from people. And I think the other thing to enhancing that is to give people, it's going back to that empowerment thing. If you give back to people the idea that actually they're the best experts, particularly in themselves, that there are not necessarily right and wrong ways of doing this, but there are ways that are doing this that you feel are right. So let's see what that means to you and why that's important to you. And I think that allowing people in terms of communication to feel a strength behind opening up is really key. But again, it talks to trust, and it talks to safety, and it talks to that conscious behavior behind leadership and team management and teams. And if you feel, if ever you feel shut down or belittled or made to feel not valued, then that's going to reverse that process. Whereas, you know, everybody's contribution is valuable. And you're right, that pressure to conform sometimes leads us to be very homogenized in how we express that. And that's really a very unhealthy, I would say, a very unhealthy thing to encourage. And I think when you have when you talk about inclusivity, you've got to mean it. You've got to mean, okay, so it's going to be okay for you to say that your experience of that is X.
Yes.
I want to hear what that is, because if I don't hear it, I'm not being inclusive.
Yes.
I've shut it down.
Yes.
And if it's a matter of shutting down one thing, then people are going to think, well, maybe they're going to shut me down then if I say that. And that's really key. I mean, just an example. And one thing that was left with me when we did a recent seminar based around changing the way we are as a business and an industry to be far more open.
Mm.
I ran a session with a couple of coaches and experts in this area on burnout, and what that means and how we can possibly prevent that happening ourselves, and what it is about our work that causes us to burn out, or causes so many people to burn out and feel unwell. And I was left at the end, having spoken about many of the issues you and I have discussed, by something one of the speakers said to the audience, where they said, well, what's the best next step for me? How do I start? And she said, someone's got to go first.
Mm-hmm.
Be that person that goes first, and be brave. And that really stayed with me, really stayed with me, because actually and you alluded to it, we think about fear and we think about what stops us doing things. And I think one of the biggest questions we need to ask ourselves is, what is stopping me? What is stopping me saying, I'm not feeling well, or I need a break, or what's stopping me? Because actually what's important to you is going to be your health, I'm sure, first and foremost. And we've seen that in the last 3 or 4 months with the COVID-19 pandemic, and everything has been focused on protecting our health, obviously protecting those people that can protect our health, the NHS, but it's about health. And it becomes the number one issue, because actually if we're ill, and with this terrible virus, in some cases that illness has led to very quick deterioration and death. We've all been sort of thought, my God, we've got to stay and we've got to look after ourselves, because without our oxygen mask on, nothing else is going to happen. And it's putting your own oxygen mask on first to enable you to help others. So I think in the context of things that we can do and things that make a difference, I mean, recently, for example, again, be first. My article that you mentioned right at the beginning was writing about my own struggles and what brought me to this work. And I've had that fermenting, that whole thing for a long time, and I kept sort of thinking, oh, I'll write about it. No, I won't. Oh, maybe I'll sort of talk to somebody else and they can write about it. No, I won't. Maybe we can do something but no, I won't do it. I kept saying no. And then I just got to a point, I said, why the hell not? Just why not? Because it happened. It happened to me.
Was that the first time you'd really opened up about it?
I'd opened up to people recently in conversation, particularly in the Wellbeing Network, but I'd never written it down and I'd never made it public. Right. And again, it was that conscious idea that, look, if I don't start saying this stuff and explaining, well, actually, I went through this during a terrible grieving process that went on for a long time, that had huge impacts on my behavior. And I was going into a competitive commercial environment at that time at the BBC, and just masking. And the result of doing that was I was doing a great job. All my colleagues, my team thought it was great. I was doing okay, high pressure, all fine. I was coming home and I was a mess. And then behaving in ways outside of that environment, which were just quite frankly, just very damaging. So I had OCD. I developed an OCD. I developed a phobia, and I was highly anxious, and it was really damaging me more than anything. But also I had a young family at the time, and my wife had started noticing a change of behaviour. So at that point, I kind of reached crisis. It wasn't a suicidal attempt, but it was like, I need this to stop. So I thought, I'll crash my car, I'll be in hospital, and I'll be fine. Someone else will look after me, and it'll all go away. And it was at that moment of realization I'd actually had that thought that, you know what, if I just end up in hospital with someone else looking after me, it'll all stop. And I turned around, I came home, and I said to my wife, I'm really not feeling well. And she said, I know. Where do we start? What's the first next step? And what do you need now? Now, talking about that now feels like just fine. And writing about it now felt fine. But I thought, you've got to go first. I've got to tell people this stuff. And that's what's led me down this path of having this kind of understanding and stuff. We recently ran something during the COVID-19 period where we're all at home. We had, just before then, we had an idea to run a session at work on men and mental health. Something I feel very strongly about. It's in the news a lot. It's something that we see a lot, but what can we actually do? What do we need to do to make a difference? We talk about the idea that men need to talk more, that there's a lot of taboo around it. We use the term weakness quite a lot about people being worried about talking about that. What can we do? So I said to a colleague of mine who had a similar thought about it, why don't we run a seminar at work, a session at work where we have some authors who have been through it and written about it. I'm happy to sit up there and we just start talking, and we have our audience and we just start chatting. And the audience should be inclusive, should be men and women, because our health affects the women in our lives, whatever that is. And then we got COVID. The place shut down and we had it all set up, and so it was off. And I said, well, we got mental health awareness week coming up, let's try and do it virtually. The challenge to that was, how inclusive could we make that? Because really what we're asking people to come and do, men, is to start talking. So on an occasion where we felt it's in an enclosed environment, the only way that we might do that is to try and do it with just men. But we didn't close it off. We just invited the men. We didn't exclude anyone. And had any of the women in the organisation come, that would have been fine. I think it might have inhibited things at that first stage a little bit, but you never know. And certainly going forward, I think it's very important to make it inclusive, because our mental health will impact the women in our lives in whatever capacity, that's work, home, whatever. It was incredibly powerful. The guy and I who set it up, we thought, well, maybe there'll just be us and our CEO, because David decided that, this is really something he wanted to come to. We invited him. He said, absolutely. That gave a lot of power to this, actually, having him there. Because if he was prepared to speak about his own struggles during this time, or even just have the conversation with men about those things, that was going to give a lot of permission for people. But equally, some people might find that quite an intimidating thing. Oh my God, we're sitting with the CEO and we're talking about emotional things and stuff like that. The response was fantastic. We had a really high engagement level of men coming in. It was a drop-in, completely voluntary. And along they came, and we had an hour session, and it was extraordinary. I mean, it was really difficult. I thought, where do we start? So the first thing I said to everybody that came is, apart from first of all, this is confidential, we non-judgmental space, positive, all of that stuff. And then I said, let's have a check-in where you are now, and then tell us what brought you here today. And those two questions were all I needed. And someone needed to be brave. Someone needed to go first. I didn't want it to be me. And I said, someone needs to go first. And someone did. And that was it. Off. Two questions, one bit of bravery. And then you had this group of men. I think there were maybe, I can't remember how many, but maybe 15 of us there. And everybody just began talking. But most impressively, the thing that really resonated was listening. Everybody in their boxes listening. And then not finding words to rescue or to make it all better, but sharing. And as soon as that started to happen, it was just all the boxes were lighting up. People helping, sharing, listening, talking. And it just proved the point. It was very powerful. We both myself and my colleague who had organised and hosted this, came away just absolutely buzzing, like, oh my God, it really works. Men can really talk. And they could all see each other. And there were some very senior leaders there, as obviously the CEO. That's how you thrive, because you share and you listen and you do it. And for me, I came away, absolutely, this is possible, and we'll do it again, and we can build it. And the response from the participants and the response from people across the company who read about it was saying, I'm so glad that was a success. That's a great thing. It was a complete first.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. I mean, my whole body is humming with the importance of listening. I mean, you touched so many chords with me there, from, people being in emotional difficulties and needing to be listening to, through everything, actually, all forms of thriving, to, I was writing the other day about listening to yourself and why you came here. What did you come here to do? The only person who knows is you. You have to be able to listen to that, so it's this, you've really hit on something with this point that we overlook because it sounds too easy. Listening, it sounds passive. It sounds like, I have two ears, they're always open, I'm always listening. No. Are you listening? Are you really listening? There's such wisdom in that. So thank you for raising it. And
just on that point, Paul, one of the things that I really noticed about the work environment is, and we pass each other when we're in the real world, as it were, every morning, and we say, hi, how you doing? And we walk on. We barely listen to the answer so often.
Yeah.
Of course, in our daily lives, we can't stop at everybody and say, how are you really doing? But every now and again, I think it's really important to do that and to look at someone when you ask the question and mean it.
Yeah.
Because if you just open even a small space and, someone's responding, yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And then you move on, you're going to miss something. But if you turn and say, sure.
Yeah.
You never know. You just never know.
And there's nothing more powerful to an individual human being than being listened to. I mean, this is a business tip as much as it is a well-being tip or an emotional health tip, right? One of the subjects I've dealt with is negotiation, for example. Listening and getting the other person to understand that you've heard them is massive. It's huge. It totally turns someone's opinion of you or the situation or the subject by listening. And again, it feels too passive, doesn't it? It feels too obvious.
But I think, you as a coach, you'll know. It's there's some key ingredients to a good coaching session, and listening is so important. And really listening. And in fact, sometimes when I remember when I was training and learning about coaching, it was one of the most challenging parts, because not jumping in or feeling a need to rescue in those moments of, actually the golden moments come when you just wait and listen. And you don't rush, because if you're, obviously in coaching, a lot of powerful questions being asked of the coachee, and you have to give that the right space, because you often can see, if you're sitting face to face and you can see them, you can often see where their eyes go. And if you interrupt at the wrong moment, they're thinking.
Yes.
And so the listening piece is critical to that, absolutely critical. And I find the golden moment is that, and you often get, when someone has never been coached before, that they're almost like, hang on a minute, you're not jumping in. Okay, so actually, what's going on? And I've noticed when I coach that there normally is quite a natural cue, because some people say, oh, it's a bit awkward, that silence, particularly when you're doing it on the phone, it can feel like it forever. But you're listening, and normally what will happen is someone will give you a cue that actually that time's gone now, then I'm okay. But you have to give it, and you have to be brave to give that space. Listening is critical. And it is a bit in business hugely.
So maybe we're probably coming towards the end of our time. So maybe it'll be good to move a little bit into what can people think about doing as a result of what we've been talking about. Maybe some tips and things. So I think straight away we should start with try listening more actively. Try listening more. Play with the use of silence. People are afraid of silence. They don't like it. It feels awkward. They want to fill it with speech. But it's massively powerful. To just be silent and allow things to sit for a moment. What other things are coming up for you in terms of what people could take away from this and do differently, Paul, based on your experience?
My experience, particularly with the network and developing that, I would say that it's going to be, every step is important, but every step is small, and it will lead you to somewhere. And one of the things that I would really encourage people to do is, we all set goals. Sometimes we set them, they just seem ridiculously unachievable. But set goals that are small steps to maybe going to a bigger goal, and just slow down. Just slow down. Rome wasn't built in a day. And it's true, we need to sometimes just slow down that path. But importantly, recognize what we have achieved at the end of a short period of time. I think we're all, I'm often struck by the fact that people, again, particularly in coaching, when you ask them to sort of maybe reflect on the last couple of weeks, it's only in that moment when you ask them that question that they do reflect on the last couple of weeks. And when they do reflect on the last couple of weeks, often they're saying, well, actually, I've done that, and I've done that, and I did that. But when they come to you, the first thing they'll say, oh, I've really done very much towards my goals this week. And they come quite deflated sometimes. And often, you can go into a coaching conversation and, so how have you been? And they say, oh, I've been rubbish. And already they're sort of starting. But in life generally, take some time to just reflect on what you have done. And you'd be surprised how far forward you move, because This time last week, I hadn't done this, 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 and this, and they're all steps that way. The other thing I think about that I would give people is to be brave. Sometimes it's going to be very out of your comfort zone. But if we stay in our comfort zone and we don't go out and stretch a bit, we're never going to grow. Go push away from that side, be brave, because the real sort of gold dust is in that outer circle. When you've pushed away, you haven't gone back, and you're moving into that learning and growing, and it's all golden stuff in there. So be brave. It's possible. Sometimes I also reflect on what's the worst that can happen. What is limiting you here? And I think that, when we set up the network, we started from some initiatives that we thought, well, that's all too big. We're never going to achieve that. So let's just do some let's kick those into the long grass and just do some easy wins. Take those easy wins, because those easy wins will lead to something else. And in our case, they did. They led to 3 significantly big things. So little things like setting up small networks to encourage people to do things that might look after their physical well-being. So we're talking about maybe some meditation, maybe some running groups, walking groups, things like that. They're little wins that you can go along the way, but they really matter, because the bigger piece comes from the learnings you get from what went well, what didn't go well, and staying with it. At the beginning of the time when I was on the network, I never sat in front of our UK board and had to present a well-being strategy or a plan and get some of their support. But there I did, I think it was about 12 months later, found myself. They'd invited us in, tell us what you're trying to achieve. How can we help you? And, the other thing I thought is, sometimes you get this kind of like, well, we haven't got the budget for that. Or, it's never going to happen because we're going to need money for it. The biggest thing I would say is just don't give up, because they will find a way. There were things we needed money for that right at the beginning we thought we're never going to get that. But you build slowly. And by building slowly, you then move yourself into a position where you can influence much more, and people can see the value. And if they can really understand the value, where you might need investment from them, they might say, you know what, I think this is actually really going to be worth it. And so we traveled a long way, and I think what's a relatively small space of time, and then you just build on that platform. You just got to build on that platform. So those are some of the sort of early tips I would suggest to people.
Fantastic. Thank you. And just to reinforce that last point, I think that's true in life in general. The metaphor that always comes to mind for me is running, because I'm a bit of an amateur runner, and and I did a marathon many years ago. But I always smile when people say tell me I can't run, because it seems to me you start just by walking to the end of the street. And then tomorrow you walk to the end of the street, but do it slightly quicker, and then perhaps go to the next corner. It's incremental, isn't it? And
very much. Small steps.
You build, and I remember when I first started running, I had a little spreadsheet, and I recorded how far I went each day, and I could just see the progress. And sometimes it fell back, but the trend was it got longer, and it got faster, and it got further, and but not expecting it all at once. It doesn't all happen on day one, and I think that's so true of many things in life. Just start with something, Take the first
and
step.
I think it's that making sure that charting it is in one way. You can see your progression, but you can also just see what you've done. And it's going back to that point is just to stop and look back. Keep looking back. What did I do? How much have I achieved? Oh yeah, I did that a little bit, and I'm doing that. And the other thing is to really hold on to that idea that if it doesn't go right, that's fine. That's where you learn. I have two children, and if they come home from school and they get 10 out of 10 in the tests every time, if they keep getting that, what are they learning? But if they come back and they say, oh well, I got 60%, okay, I said, okay, so what do you need to learn then? What would make the difference? What would take you from 60 to 62? Not what will take you from 60 to 100, because again, and again, I allude to the work we do in coaching, is if you can give some sort of a measure for people, some way of kind of charting it, and they say they put themselves on a 6. It's just, well, what takes you to 6.5? Not what takes you to 10. And I think we can all do a bit of that, because so often, and I mean, it's always the one that people roll out is around dieting. People come into the new year, I'm going to lose this amount of weight, and they set themselves some really high target to hit. And of course, if they don't hit it, they feel a failure, and then it sort of sets them back. So small steps.
And it feels impossible. Yeah,
It-
fantastic. Paul, thank you. There was a lot in that.
yeah,
But thank you very much for sharing. There's loads that people take away from that, I know. I look forward to reading the comments and the questions that we'll get on the web, because we get quite a few.
cool.
And there's going to be a lot, I think.
Great. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I love talking about it because it is about thriving, and you can probably tell from me, I'm thriving because these are subjects that I feel that can make a difference not just to me but to others.
Yeah,
So I hope it helps other people listening.
this is the important stuff, and I'm full of that admiration for what you've done in the company there. So keep going.
Thank you very much, and it's been very
Thank
nice.
you very much, Paul.
Cheers,
Nice to
Paul.
talk to you. Bye bye.